I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Time for Teachership podcast. This is episode 205, and we are continuing from our last two episodes of mini-series on supporting students to critically analyze power dynamics. So our first episode, episode 203, was on gender, giving some examples of how to analyze gender and some frameworks for that, along with some activities. In the last episode, episode 204, we analyzed race and nation and the racialization using Iris Young's framework around oppression, the 5 faces of oppression. And we also pulled from NYU's curriculum scorecard and the historical thinking skills from Stanford History Education Group, along with some specific lesson activity resources that you could use. So given all of that, I want to say, continuing into today, you can use any of the resources that we have previously shared, particularly in last episode, to analyze class. I think you could definitely use Iris Young's framework. And we also want to just name that you can also use the same overarching 4 steps that I will recap one more time here, but were also shared at the beginning of the previous 2 episodes. And that is, when you're analyzing power dynamics, the first thing I do is find a theory or framework that works for you, that makes sense for you, and will make sense for your students and be relevant to what you're analyzing. The second step I would do, if necessary, is to break it down. So whether it is English proficiency or just age level, if it is in the best interest of your students, I would break it down and simplify that hyper academic language, condense the number of attributes if needed. Sometimes there is language in these academic frameworks that I need to Google and understand. And for myself, I need to break it down to be able to apply it. So just naming here, the important thing is students understand the framework and can apply it. It's not about the very specific words that they need to use. If you need to use a synonym or kind of condense the number of attributes at first, fine. I think do that, because the critical thinking is what we want. Third step, invite students to apply the framework or your kind of version of the framework using modern, interesting media. There has to be high interest to initially grapple with it. We know this for cognitive load, right? We don't want students to be using new hard content with a new hard framework or activity. We want to use simple or familiar or engaging content, right, while we are introducing something new like a framework or discussion protocol. So invite students to use this framework and apply it using really interesting media, and then hang a visual reminder or anchor chart of the framework and invite application to course content or texts as you move through lessons or units. So we are done with all the reminders of the previous episodes, and now we're getting into socioeconomic class as something you may want to analyze with your students. So again, you could use the NYU scorecard categories to analyze media like films for social class. I think the framework still works. Where, just a reminder of the NYU scorecard categories we named, those are diverse and accurate representation and inverting power dynamics. I think you also use Iris Young's framework to analyze historical events, current events, or stories like in novels or other media. I'm going to link to a few examples of things that talk about class in children's films. There's an article that would be good regarding younger students. So children's films being like pretty young, that would be relevant. Older students, you can watch a video that talks about class in TV shows throughout history. So that could be relevant. I think they use things like the Jeffersons, time-wise, all the way to like Gilmore Girls. So I think there are some present day things that they could get into there. And then the new framework I want to introduce today is McGregor's Marxist-inspired conceptual framework. So really cool thesis. I'm going to link to it in the blog post for this episode. But on page 14 of his thesis, he kind of talks about, I'm presuming gender, I'm sorry, but McGregor talks about what the conceptual framework is. And what's really interesting is McGregor developed this in relation to TV shows that were
for younger students. And by younger students, I mean like toddlers, preschool age, I think 2 to 6 year olds. There we go, 2 to 6 year olds. And so that's going to be something that even kindergartners can kind of connect to. And so just to make sure that this is accessible to everybody, the themes certainly are, and then you'll figure out for your students what language you're specifically going to use. So, okay. Uh, Relationship to authority figures is the first kind of part of his framework, of McGregor's framework that they use. And this specifically is referring to in the shows naming some sort of hierarchy or that kind of discipline is expected or there's kind of obeying authority present. So this idea of relationship to authority figures is a piece of this Marxist framework. The second piece is consumerism. So everything kind of relating to the production of or the selling of goods or materials. Even, for kids wanting things that they don't have, right? This idea of consumerism. The third piece of this, as listed by McGregor, is entrepreneurship. So this is usually depicted as contributing to materialism and the desire to be as rich as possible or like have lots of money, being very motivated by money. So entrepreneurship. The fourth is I think McGregor calls it teaching right or wrong or rule following. I think that's a big piece for young kids that they're going to attach to kind of this rule following. And that kind of extends to respecting personal property. So you have that kind of Marxism there, where we see property as attached to people and having ownership, right? Contrasted with kind of indigenous nations' beliefs of like communal ownership and like not having that personal ownership of property or land or that kind of thing. So teaching right or wrong and the rule following is kind of connected to that ownership idea, as well as connected to that idea of obedience to authority. And then the fifth component from McGregor's framework is individualism. So you have the vilification of support systems, really naming that low-income people and characters are defined by their work, their need for a job or their pursuit, of a job, their fear of losing a job, and high-income people, contrastly, being the people who can experience leisure or fun or play. And so this is big. There's 5 components. Again, if I'm thinking of younger students who are going to apply this to 2 to 6 year olds, right? Like 2 to 6 year old shows. If I'm thinking of kindergartners who are going to be probably most familiar with or most recently familiar with those shows, I'm going to probably want to reduce the number of categories from 5 to maybe 3. I also would want to play with the language to make it a bit more accessible to those students. So here's how I might break it down for younger students. Please feel free to add some additional ideas in the comment section of the blog or email me for some ideas because I'd love to continue playing with this and your students best and what terms resonate with them. But I might break it down like this. I might say rules is a category. So one word, simple word that they understand, rules. And then what kind of falls into that from McGregor's framework would be like the authority, relationship to authority figure, right? Kind of like in student language, I might say who's in charge, right? And then also the idea of rule following, right? That teaching right and wrong, rule following component of McGregor's framework, both kind of under the umbrella of rules. And then I might say the second part is like either making money or buying stuff. Maybe it's both, making money and buying stuff. And so that is going to be from McGregor's framework, the consumerism component and the entrepreneurship component. Right? We're very motivated by money. We want to make it, we want to use it to buy stuff. I think, again, that buying stuff is really going to resonate with students, like wanting things they don't have, wanting to buy things, right? Like toys, clothes, whatever it is. And then the final phrase that I was thinking of for this individualism component from McGregor's framework is something that we hear very often in like the preschool, toddler era of like, I can do it myself. So this, I would actually like put that in quotes, I can do it myself, as the phrase of the third category. So we have rules, making money, buying stuff, and I can do it myself as the 3 categories of the framework. So again, it is McGregor's framework. It's just distilled and simplified into smaller categories and simpler language. And then what I would have students do is I would have them discuss and analyze TV shows. So you could actually use in McGregor's study, McGregor lists the animated shows used for the development of this framework. And specifically, McGregor notes they're looking for 2 to 6 year old shows, like that's the audience is for 2-year-olds to 6-year-olds. And specifically, McGregor was seeking and using shows that had gender and racial diversity of characters. So even when there were like non-human characters, wanted kind of a gender diversity there, and landed on the following shows. So feel free to use these with your students, and I'll list them on the blog post as well, so you can capture that there. Elena of Avalor. I'm not familiar with that show, so I hope I'm saying that correctly. Arthur, Curious George, Doc McStuffins, and Sophia the First. And now, from my understanding and what was written in McGregor's thesis, these shows are, or at least were, I believe they all are, streaming on Disney or PBS Kids. So if you have access to those streaming services, you will be able to also show any of these shows in their entirety, or just clips from these shows in your class, so that students who are not familiar with these would be able to still engage in the analysis, because you can present them with the show during class time and then invite students to analyze after you watch it together as a class. So I think that also, from an equity lens and just access standpoint, it makes sense, even if students are familiar with these shows, to show it in class. So now you know where they're streaming and where you can access them. But I do think it's also great if students can kind of bring in these examples, or you can kind of name some of these shows in your conversations about power dynamics, so that students can kind of organically bring them into conversation and use them as kind of valuable prior or outside knowledge or background information that is relevant to a discussion of, for example, a historical event you're talking about in social studies time, or picture book, or something that you're reading as a class, because we want to lean into the culturally responsiveness of these practices, of saying your expertise of this character's lived experience, or your lived experience that connects to this character's journey, or the way that these identities play out, like that is actually very valuable. And that is why some of my students who were not successful in kind of traditional classes where they had to memorize historical information or dates or people, whatever, were so good at my intersectional gender studies curriculum, because it's all about critical analysis and counter narratives and understanding these power dynamics that they are very well versed in, because they haven't been like having easy access to that very traditional hegemonic curriculum. And they have constantly had to have the lived experience of countering those narratives from their knowledge, and often are denied that expertise and said, like, that's actually not relevant background information. And so you may have heard before on the podcast me talking about this kind of frustration of mine of naming that our kids don't have quote unquote relevant background knowledge, when they actually do. And it's kind of our issue of not expanding our understanding enough to say, wow, actually that is really relevant. And that students' critical analysis of this thing is a really hard skill that they just demonstrated they know how to do. And that's super cool. And to do that, they built on their prior knowledge that they certainly have. And other students who may be like A students don't have that, and their criticality is lacking. And so I don't want to like apply a deficit lens to those students necessarily, but I do want to say, like, this is an asset that is so, so amazing and powerful and important for the world, and for making a better world, and for critiquing the problems in our world, that we need to value it just as much, if not more, right? Talk about inverting power dynamics, if not more, than the traditional memorization of facts or regurgitation of things, or like even the practice standard or skill, historical skill of making an argument, claim evidence reasoning, which is important, is great. And I would argue that I want students who are going to critically analyze power dynamics almost more than I want students to present claim evidence reasoning. I mean, they go hand in hand, but I think that thinking of analyzing power dynamics is harder, actually, than claim evidence reasoning. And so that is what I want us to cultivate and think expansively about. And I hope that these frameworks and activity examples and links that are going to be all in this blog post, and of course in the previous 2 episodes as well, that are part of this mini series on critically analyzing power dynamics across gender, race, nation, and class, will be helpful for you. So as a final resource that is also going to be linked in the blog post for this episode, I am going to give you critical analysis resource bank, which is a slide deck that I would use and pull slides from whenever inviting students to critically analyze power dynamics. So there's things from an intersectionality wheel image to questions that Goldie Muhammad surfaces and names as she defines criticality in her book, Cultivating Genius, and then Unearthing Joy. There's all sorts of resources that you could use. And also you could just kind of get a sense of and then make your own version of when we're trying to support and scaffold students' analysis of power dynamics. So something that, again, will save you time because you can just pop it in there when you're discussing this stuff and not have to create a brand new slide, and also will reduce the cognitive load for students because they're going to be familiar with this visual or this, question prompt or format of discussion or whatever, and that they can just fully be in the thinking about power and not thinking about like this new activity or this new slide they've never seen before. And they ultimately will be able to expand their use of the skill beyond that one lesson to the rest of your class lessons, to next year in social studies or ELA class, to outside of school and the rest of their lives. Super excited to hear how this goes. Please let me know what kind of activities you're doing, how your students are responding. This is like my favorite part of teaching, and it is my biggest kind of feeling of FOMO or missing out on students' interaction with these constructs and ideas. And so please share with me via email or in the comment section of the blog post of this episode, or if you're listening on Spotify, that really cool comment section at the bottom. Again, all the resources that we mentioned today are linked in today's blog post episode at lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/205. Until next time.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.